Russian president warns that trust in the U.S. dollar is on the dramatic decline, and that's why the greenback has to be revisited in global trade. Earlier in our news review program, we spoke to guests about Putin's warning. Let's have a look.
On this news review, Russian President Vladimir Putin has renewed calls for the role of the U.S. dollar to be revisited in global trade as he accused Washington of seeking to dominate the world.
In this time, the new economic centers have emerged. The role of regional currencies has risen. The balance of powers and interests has shifted. Obviously, those deep changes require adaptation on part of international financial organizations and rethinking the role of the dollar. After becoming global reserve currency, it transformed into the instrument of pressure by country on the rest of the world.
Speaking at an economic forum alongside Chinese President Xi Jinping in St. Petersburg, the Russian president called for deep reform, claiming that trust in the dollar is on sharp decline. Putin said world economy has entered the period of trade wars, noting that his country is against such a move and supports democratic economic relations. He also expressed concerns by what he called attempts to force Chinese technology giant Huawei out of the global market. Putin also accused Washington of seeking to, quote, extend its jurisdiction, that is, to the whole world. For his part, Xi said his party, or his country rather, is ready to share technological innovations with partners.
China is looking to build beneficial cooperation on the basis of equality and mutual respect with friendly countries. China is ready to share technological innovations with all partners, in particular 5G technology.
Xi said steps need to be taken to, quote, overcome inequalities in the global economic system, adding, the aspirations of nations toward a better life cannot be stopped. Xi's comments came as China races to be a global leader in advanced wireless networks amid rivalry with the U.S. Washington has blacklisted Chinese tech giant Huawei, a key supplier of the equipment for 5G networks in several countries. Joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have the Senior Research Fellow at Global Policy Institute, George Samueli, joining us from Budapest, and also Professor of Economics, Rodney Shakespeare, joining us from the British capital, London. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Samueli in Budapest. Walk us through the recent comments made by Russian President Vladimir Putin. He believes that trust in the U.S. dollar is on sharp decline globally.
Well, President Putin has addressed this issue many times before, and it's becoming a more and more of a serious issue as the United States uses the power that it has, the economic power it has through the dollar being the global reserve currency, of squeezing more and more governments that it doesn't like. We've seen this in the case of Venezuela. We now see this in the case of Iran. And Putin is saying that this cannot go on. I mean, you can't have a system in which one power can use its financial muscle to squeeze all manner of countries that it doesn't approve of, and also to squeeze those countries that are actually doing business with the countries that the U.S. doesn't approve of. And this is becoming a very urgent issue. And so Putin has brought the subject up before, but now it's a top priority.
Rodney Shakespeare, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he wants the role of the U.S. dollar to be revisited in global trade. The question is, how?
Well, before I answer that, please remember that the United States has over 800 military bases around the world. And all the time it is pushing right up against Russia and right up against China. At the same time, it is using its control, technical control over the exchanges of money in the SWIFT banking system. And lastly, it is using the fact that the dollar is widely used in trade. Now, the way forward to create the new multipolar world, rather than the unipolar world, which is what America wants, is, of course, to aim at that financial system. And that requires a new computer banking system for the exchange of money in trade. Secondly, it requires the establishment of currencies which are stronger than the United States. And the United States economy is now heavily involved in debt. It's private debt, it's corporation debt, and it's government debt. And at some point, people are going to suddenly wake up to realize that the emperor has no clothes, or rather the dollar has no clothes. So looking at it overall, we have to welcome the multipolar world which is coming into being. We have to, in the ways open to us, oppose aggressions. We have to construct a new exchange of currencies for trade, which is not dominated by the SWIFT systems. The Iranian trade deal, a nuclear deal, is not working primarily because the Americans can decide who does and who does not trade with America and who does not trade with Iran. In all these areas, action must be taken in a firm desire to create a multipolar world.
And Mr. Samueli, before we go, I'd like to put the same question to you as well. Putin says that the U.S. dollar has to be revisited, the role of the U.S. dollar has to be revisited in global trade. Do you agree with what our guest in London said?
Yes, I do. I agree with my colleague. I think the most likely way forward will be the emergence of the yuan as the global currency of choice. The Chinese economy is becoming really the economic powerhouse of the world. The United States is desperately trying to thwart this, hence its current campaign against Huawei. But nonetheless, I mean, the economic capacity of China, its enormous productivity, and its huge trade surplus. And now that it's engaged in multilateral banking, it's in massive investments in infrastructure globally, this is going to be the economic powerhouse, and therefore the Chinese currency, I think, will become the major rival to the dollar. But keep in mind, the Americans are not going to give this up easily, and hence the potential for a serious armed conflict is very real. The United States is just not ready to give up its global supremacy just like that.
All right, let's leave it there. Senior Research Fellow at Global Policy Institute, George Samueli, joining us from Budapest, and thanks to Professor of Economics Rodney Shakespeare joining us from the British capital, London. With that, brings us to an end here on this edition of Press TV's News Review. Thanks for watching, everybody.